Welcome to the SIWIKE Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with our guest host, Yauhan. Yauhan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Luki. How about yourself?
I'm fantastic as always. So Yauhan comes to us with a background in change management, psychology, career coaching, a whole bunch of different things. So Yauhan, if you were to describe yourself and what you're up to these days, so what are you doing now?
Yeah, if I was to describe myself, you put it exactly, the way I would describe it. It's an amalgamation of being an HR consultant, an IO psychologist, a change manager, as well as now, most recently, a career coach as well. In terms of what I'm up to right now, so I am actually on a break from my full-time job at Deloitte Canada because my wife and I had our third baby, a baby boy, who is turning 5 months just in a few days. So I've got my hands full with him. But otherwise, I work for Deloitte Canada as part of their internal change management practice, focused on internal operations. So think of this as consulting within Deloitte being my client. And in addition to that, over the past couple of years, I've also been involved with coaching folks specifically in, from a career perspective. So this ranges from students all the way to the leadership level. And the coaching focuses on everything from gaining clarity in terms of what folks want to do next, to networking, resume, LinkedIn, interview preparation, all the way to negotiating salary. I want to also tell the audience that I'm a huge fan of Luki. I've been following his work for the past couple of years now. So I love all of his podcasts. I love the content he puts out there on LinkedIn, his YouTube videos as well. So if you aren't following, give this a follow, give this a like, and especially if you're looking for personal development advice, career advice, Luki is the person to follow.
Sounds good. Really appreciate the kind words, and my ego thanks you for that so much, Yauhan. So obviously that's not necessarily where you started, having 3 kids, Deloitte change management on the internal side. So if we could rewind and go back in time and talk a little bit about Yauhan as a kid. So what were you like growing up? What were some early fond childhood memories? What were you like as a kid?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I've been, thinking about this one. So, as a kid, first and foremost, I grew up with my grandmom. So, from my paternal side, I grew up in India in a very small city called Pune. It's not very small anymore because now there's a lot of folks, from all parts of the world working there in tech. So it's pretty booming right now. So Pune is where I grew up with my grandmom for the first 6 years of my life. As a kid, obviously growing up with a grandparent, I was extremely spoiled. So I remember playing every single day. I had a bunch of friends in the neighborhood who I used to play with, all kinds of games, running around, board games, and it was less focused on academics. I would say more focused on having fun. And I would say those were the best days of my life because, there was so much joy every single day in everything that I did. And, just all of the love and affection I received from my grandmom and everyone around me, being, the only young kind of child over there. So very fond memories of that. After that, I joined my parents. So my parents at the time were working in Dubai, in the UAE. So I joined them at the age of 6. And I grew up in Dubai from the age of 6 to 16. So I spent about 10 years over there. Very, very different from my life in India. So in Dubai, now with my parents watching over me, it was definitely, heavily focused on school and academics. And we were involved in quite a few extracurricular activities as well, like swimming, tennis, karate. So that kept me quite busy and quite occupied as well. I did quite well actually from an academic perspective. So I was always, in the top 2, top 3 people in my class. Okay. I loved playing sports as well. So I played, cricket. I did swimming, played a little bit of soccer as well. And then after that, in my teenage years, so the age of 16, we moved to Canada. So this was back in 2000. So it's been 23 years. So I did my high school over here. I did my undergrad over here at the University of Toronto. In terms of so this is an interesting story. In terms of my major, once I finished high school over here, I was very confused in terms of what I should pick. My dad is an engineer. My older brother also pursued engineering. So my there was parental pressure around also going into engineering, which I did. So I did industrial engineering for my first year at U of T. But I quickly realized that, numbers and physics and all of that was not my thing.
Right.
So in my second year, I actually switched over to psychology. So I have my, honors undergrad in psychology with a minor in criminology.
Okay.
And then I went on to pursue my master's in business psychology, formerly called, industrial organizational psychology from the US. And then after that, I began my career working for different companies. Yeah.
Sounds good. And I love if we dig down a little bit into that, where, as you mentioned, okay, the aspirations are for you to follow in dad's older brother's footsteps to become an engineer. And what was the process like, I guess, to go down that route and then ultimately to switch? Because that must not have been an easy conversation with mom. If you could share a little bit about those two, that would be helpful to folks, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, it was definitely not an easy conversation. Actually, it was multiple very difficult conversations that I had to have with my parents. So, the reason I chose engineering was, again, because my parents thought that, that would possibly be a good path for me. It's not that I was not good with, with math and with physics and all of this, but it's just I didn't have an interest. Like ever since I was, in my teenage years, I always had a fascination for people,
Right,
for human behavior. And this is why there was always that natural inclination for fields like psychology. So I had to sit them down and really make them understand that, this is something I'm really passionate about. This is something I think I will do good at. And then eventually they understood. Because at the end of the day, they kept telling me as well that, go with something where you feel that you can contribute, you feel there is that natural kind of inclination, interest, enjoyment. And I told them that, after finishing, I promised that I will go on to do further studies. So it wouldn't be, because you couldn't do much, even now you can't do much with just an undergraduate degree in psychology. Versus an undergraduate degree in engineering, yes, of course, there are options. You don't necessarily have to do, your MBA, although you might choose to do that later on, but you can at least get a decent job with an undergrad in engineering. So that was kind of the friction point as well. But here we are. I definitely, I think, managed to convince them well.
So sounds like it was, a little bit of supportive parents where, it sounded like they wanted you to follow in the natural footsteps, but they realized that if it's a passion for you, they said, you know what, let's go with something that you enjoy. And it sounds like that having the extra master's or follow-on study helped seal the deal, because as you said, having an undergrad psychology, it's pretty challenging unless you have something a little more clinical or more further study. So for those out there that are looking to go more on the people side, consider having a conversation with mom and dad on and adding kind of like a promise to do a master's or something that might help them in that conversation. And during that undergrad process, were you always interested on the business side of things? Because you ultimately went into the organizational side.
Yeah.
Was that something that you cultivated throughout, or you were exploring some different options on the psychology side? So could you describe a little bit of that?
Yeah. Great question, Luki. Thanks for asking. So when I was, as I went through my second, third, and fourth year in psychology, I actually enjoyed most of the courses I took, whether those were, very clinical focused courses or just personality psychology, right? I enjoyed a lot of, also the mental health kind of courses I took around, we called it like the darker side of psychology. And my goal was always to become either, a counselor or, go on to become a psychiatrist, actually, and possibly look at medical school, because that's what's required to become a psychiatrist. So there were a couple of options. I wasn't completely firm on one until I reached my fourth year, and this is where I was like, okay, I have to really now decide if I want to become like a counselor, clinician, or go on to med school. And this is where I had a couple of really good conversations with my older brother. So my older brother is about 4.5 years older than me, and he's someone who I've always looked up to, especially when it came to academics and careers and all of this. He's done really, really well for himself. And he said, look at other options as well. You don't have to just, look at those one or two options, because psychology, you can do so much, right? He said, have you thought about school psychology? So there are school psychologists. Have you thought about industrial organizational psychology? And at the time, I had never heard about this, right? And then he said, think about what you like about the clinical psychology pieces and why you want to actually get into that. And I said, I enjoy working with people who are going through difficult times. And at that time, luckily, I was able to get a couple of internships as well. So I did one internship with CAMH, which is, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And I did another one with the Geneva Center for Autism. And while those two internships I really, really enjoyed, and it was very fulfilling to, help people with autism, to help people with mental health issues, I was starting to take on a lot of that onto myself. And this is something that made me introspect, that is that something that I can do long term in terms of a career where I can do a good job helping them, but I'm taking on a lot of their challenges as my own. And so I had a couple more conversations with my brother, and he said, look at also industrial organizational psychology. He said, it focuses on psychology at the workplace. It focuses on things like, making people more engaged, more productive, right? Which is, again, the people side of things, which you have always enjoyed. And then you're not taking on the strain of, other people's clinical issues. And so I started reading about that and exploring that, and spoke to a few people who had gone through that journey. To answer your question, like, I wasn't interested in business as much. And what I found out was IO psychology, or industrial organizational psychology, is focused on the workplace, but you don't really need, a strong business background or a strong interest in business. So it worked out, perfectly from an interest perspective. And I said, you know what, let's just go and pursue it. And that's what I did.
Sounds good. What I took from that is have lots of conversations with mentors. So be it older brothers or people in the industry doing something that you want to do, because oftentimes they provide a good lens in terms of, well, is that really what it's like to do it? Or is it just some like Hollywood glamorized version of what I think it is? And then you also touched on something where you had this thought that, well, business, I need to know like numbers, finance, accounting, and stuff like that. Well, no, actually, if you peel back the layers, it is in the context of business, but it's still very people focused. So maybe testing some of those assumptions are quite helpful. And then the other aspect of it, where you talked about doing the internships at CAMH and the Geneva Center for Autism. Sometimes, on the psychology side, there is a lot that clinicians take on themselves, right? Like it is a rough occupation that you take, because they're talking about their problems, right? And if you don't kind of build the ability to weather their storms, then your storms will be that much more challenging. So just being aware of where you can best help, because you could have, but realizing that you're probably better suited in other aspects would be great. So, and I'd love if you continued on the journey with, you graduating and now moving through different areas where ultimately now you're more on like the change management side of things. I guess it's a close cousin of IO. But yeah, if you can walk us through a little bit of some of the skills and the experiences that you had along the way to kind of get to where you are right now.
Yeah. So I actually then, once I finished my undergrad in psychology, I pursued my master's right after undergrad in industrial organizational psychology. I went to the US to pursue this at a small college, small university called the University of New Haven. They have an affiliation with Yale University as well in Connecticut. So I did some courses, over there as well. So decent program, not a very big, renowned kind of university, but a good, reputable university specifically for the IO psychology field. So I spent a couple of years, doing my master's over there. And I took courses like, organizational behavior, psychometrics, employee engagement, right? Like the typical statistics, those kind of courses. And we had to then pick a stream between, going for the HR route or going for the organizational development or consulting route. I wasn't as much interested in HR, especially the traditional HR with, comp and benefits, total rewards, recruitment. I mean, I liked it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the consulting and the OD. So I picked that stream. And for my final semester, I took those courses. I also had a couple of internships over there. So I gained some experience, in terms of, what it's like to work in IO type of jobs. So I had a couple of internships. Again, a small boutique firms. And then when I graduated, I was extremely, I don't know, I guess I would thank my stars. I was extremely fortunate to grab a job right after graduation. And I think I was one of the first ones in my cohort of, I think, like 30, 40 people to get a job. It wasn't a big fancy company. It was actually a company with 5 employees. It was a boutique consultancy that focused on psychometric assessments. So the company is called Performance Programs. And it's like a husband, wife, and they have a couple of employees, IO psychologists, who essentially administer all kinds of assessments to big companies. So even though they are a company of 5 people, the assessments they administer and the coaching they do as a follow-up to those assessments are to Fortune 500 companies. So big name companies. So that was really, quite an experience for me going out of grad school. And I think it was a good stepping stone for me where, I didn't right away start with a big company because I generally get very intimidated when it's something that's, beyond my scope, especially from a work perspective. So this was perfect. They were extremely good people and, they helped me learn, they helped me grow. And I got a lot of exposure to, 360 assessments, personality assessments, cognitive assessments, employee engagement surveys, change management surveys. So I was there for 2 years in the US. My plan was always to come back to Toronto because this is where, I had my family, essentially my friends from high school. So I never planned on staying in the US long term. So what happened after 2 years was I saw an opportunity at Accenture, a big global consultancy, and it looked interesting. It was that for a consultant level position, and I applied for it. I was like, I'm 99% sure I'm not going to get this. Who in Accenture is going to hire someone who's working for a small boutique consultancy? But I was surprised. They actually called me for an interview. And they said the position is actually for a change management consultant. At this point, I had very limited knowledge about what change management is. And the only experience I had was administering change management surveys at performance programs. So it was very limited in terms of knowledge, but they were actually quite open right from the beginning, Accenture, to tell me that we're not looking for extensive experience. We are looking for young, ambitious, hungry, driven people. To really come on board, and we will provide you with training on our change management methodology, our practices, and you take it and then you basically deliver that to our clients. You get a lot of support because this is a consultant level. You get a lot of support from managers, senior managers, partners. And I did really, really well in the interviews. And I got hired over there as a consultant. And that's what led to my change management journey.
That's awesome. And it sounds like it's that quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So you might as well go through that.
Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah. And whether you think you're going to be able to grab it, if it seems interesting and you want to go after it, then do that. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about, you mentioned that you were one of the first to land a job after graduating. Was there something to that process where you were applying earlier, you were networking earlier, you were doing something earlier that allowed you to have that kind of situation? What would you share on that side?
Yeah, excellent question. So I would share on that side, a couple of things. One, I think what differentiated me from maybe some of the other folks was I did 2 internships. A lot of people either did none or they did one internship, with a handful of people I think who did two. So that internship put experience onto my resume, where a lot of people didn't have that or didn't have as much of that. The other thing is I got involved also on campus activities. So I took on a couple of roles on campus, which again demonstrated my leadership skills in addition to just being a student. I also took on a part-time role with the Career Center in the university. So this gave me exposure to, resume writing and networking, interviews, and all of this. So that was another thing I did. And then, yes, I was at that time, this was what, I think like close to 15 years ago, using LinkedIn. So not extensively, but I would go on to LinkedIn. So this job actually I found on LinkedIn as well. Search on LinkedIn, connect with people on LinkedIn. So I remember, applying for the job and then messaging the recruiter because the name of the recruiter was posted, and I sent them almost like a cover letter, but through LinkedIn, telling them, why I would, do really well and how my background matches the position. And yeah, so it was to answer your question, a lot of, proactive steps as opposed to hoping that something lands on my plate. That seldom happens.
I think that's a lot of good advice for the students that are still going through the process out there. If you have a little bit of time, so get involved on campus, career center or otherwise. A lot of areas where you can kind of demonstrate some experience or get exposure to different areas. Internships are wonderful, obviously, if you can actually have them paid or otherwise, right? Obviously, paid is nice, and if you can do more than one, that's even better. Yeah. And then also leveraging some of those best practices on LinkedIn, where after you apply, you make sure that you connect with folks. But even still, prior to applying, that would be even better if you can kind of set yourself up for those future roles after graduating or even later on. So a lot of good things where I'm sure you share a lot of that with folks who are on the job searching as a kind of a testament to what they have. And so that kind of led the journey to change management. And then obviously now you're you're also doing the coaching part of it. What kind of led you into that area?
Yeah, so I spent about 4 years with Accenture. And then I moved on to working for Walmart, so Walmart Canada, in their head office over here in Mississauga, Ontario. And my role over there was focused on setting up a change management practice. So they had change management, but they didn't have, a specific framework, a methodology, tools, templates for different kinds of, change plans and communication plans and all of that. So I helped with that. I spent about a year and a half in Walmart. And then my position, unfortunately, was eliminated. And I was offered a couple of options, but it didn't fit with my aspirations at the time. So again, I was back in the market, and within I think a month, 2 months, I landed my opportunity with Deloitte Canada. And this was again through networking, through references. So one of the partners who I used to work with at Accenture, I had reached out to him saying, I'm looking for my next opportunity. Consulting could be an option. And he connected me with the consulting lead for Canada at Deloitte. The two of them were good friends. And of course, I didn't even have to submit a resume. I just went through 2 rounds of interviews and I received the offer.
Yeah. And that's probably a good note for folks where if you're frustrated with the whole applying online, the resumes and things like that, that's one of the huge values of networking, where, again, you didn't even have a resume. You still need to go to the interviews because they need to vet you.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a huge win if you can land those in lieu of having to go through call it the lottery of applying online.
Yeah, absolutely, Luki. And relationships and networking is a long-term game, right? Like, this is a relationship I built at Accenture with the partner for many years, and nothing really materialized in terms of a benefit from that relationship. Not that I was looking for something out of that relationship, but then a few years down the road, I just reached out to a bunch of people who I had a good relationship with, and he was one of them, and he ended up helping. So a lot of people, they get frustrated with the job search, saying networking, it's not really, like, I'm not able to form a strong enough relationship. And, now there's a job opening and I can't ask for a referral because I haven't built a relationship. But it's a long-term game. It's not necessarily for your next role. It could be the one after that or even the one after.
Yeah. What comes to mind is the quote, dig your well before you're thirsty, because at some point in your life, you will be thirsty, right? Something will come up and you'll be eliminated or new circumstance or whatever else. Yeah. And you'll wish you would have started digging because otherwise you're going to have to start where you are. And if you do so without any expectation of return, that will really help because the expression is like the more you give, the more you receive, right? And it starts by giving, right? It's the quote's not the more you receive, the more you receive, right? So you can't hope to just get. The more that you invest in your network, your social capital, building meaningful connections, whatever you call it, digging that well, then it'll reap rewards later on. And sometimes it's just helping others because you might be in the fortunate situation where you're the one helping in the future, which obviously makes folks
absolutely
happy. And I love if you could share a little bit on the kind of mentoring and coaching. So you obviously set up the practice at Walmart and you're doing some of that work at Deloitte as well. But on the side, helping enabling folks, what was the process to kind of, land your first client or helping out on that side?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention was, when I was at the University of Toronto doing my undergrad, I also had an internship at that time. In addition to, the 2 clinical internships, I also had an internship at the Career Center over there in my 4th year, actually, where I was helping other 4th year students network and fix up their resume and make connections with employers. So this was my first exposure to, careers and job searching and all of this. And then again, I had that experience at my master's at the Career Center working over there. But so I had 2 of these experiences, which meant that, I had some sort of experience and some sort of inclination towards helping other people from a career perspective. Now, when the pandemic hit, back in March 2020, this is where obviously a lot of people got displaced, lost their jobs, there were hiring freezes. And I had a flood of people. I mean, I always get a lot of people reaching out to me on LinkedIn on a weekly basis. But at that specific time, I had loads and loads of messages of people saying, Yauhan, we want to get into Deloitte, or can you help us with our career, or can you help us decide what's next? And because of the volume, I was not able to help everyone in a timely fashion. And whoever I used to help, they used to always say, Yauhan, you've given me so much information, so much value. And, I feel bad that it's all, pro bono. So one of the ladies, she actually said, Yauhan, you've spent a lot of time behind me. Here's $100. And that was obviously very, kind and thoughtful of her. And then that triggered the whole, I guess, entrepreneur spirit in me to awaken. And yeah, I mean, for me, it's, my full-time job is with Deloitte Canada. So this is more, even right now, even though it's been 3 years, I look at it more as a passion project where I am, I'm just grateful and really thankful to be able to be in a position where I have worked at some of these big name companies, and I have kind of, used a bunch of different strategies from, resume and cover letter in the early part of my journey to then networking and references and personal branding towards the latter half to get my roles at Walmart. Even with Walmart, there was no resume required. Walmart and then with Deloitte as well. So I just teach them the journey that I have been through myself. And that's how I got into career coaching. I also, when I was with Accenture, I did a lot of volunteer work with companies like Access Employment and Triac as part of, the volunteer efforts that the companies undertake. So I had a lot of exposure over there as well, working with new immigrants. And that continues till date. I do a lot of work right now for Achieve Canada, helping, typically a lot of marginalized women, new immigrants who, for whatever reasons have a setback in terms of their careers and, huge gaps in employment, and just helping them get back on track with their life and their careers.
That's amazing. So it's awesome how you practice what you preach and just basically share all the experiences, because that's oftentimes how it starts, right? If you've gone through it yourself, then sharing what you've been through is easy, right? So you don't have to like fake it till you make it. This is just, I went through this. This helped me. Hopefully, it'll help other people as well. And obviously, there's a lot more to go through. You'll have a very fruitful career at Deloitte and helping folks, coaching on the side, and who knows what other amazing things there. And if we could go back and share some of this, like the stuff I wish I knew earlier. I know you already shared a whole bunch of them, but if you have any pivotal moments where Yauhan in high school, university, when your position at Walmart was limited or whatever, what are some of the pieces of SIWIKE that you have for yourself during any of those times?
Yeah. So I'll share a couple more. When you are in high school and you are transitioning into going for college or going for university, I would say don't wait until you get to grade 12 before you start thinking about what's next for you, right? Even in high schools, there is a career center, there is an office that helps you with decisions around your career. So I would say, 1 or 2 years before, at least get some direction. You don't have to decide exactly, what you want to do, but get some direction in terms of what field would be good for you, what college would be good for you, and then what program would be good for you. There's a lot of, teachers you can talk to, guidance counselors you can talk to as well. And then the same advice from, going from university or college onto the real world, right? Start in your second year, start in your third year. Don't wait until, the final semester of your fourth year to think about, what can I do with this marketing degree, or what can I do with this, undergraduate degree in finance? Do I need to do my master's? Right? So talk to people. Again, you may find some people who with an undergraduate degree have been successful obtaining good employment with a decent reputable employer, getting good compensation as well, or you may find that 8 out of 10 people I've spoken to, they really went on to do an MBA or a PMP or whatever that is to really reach that level. I think also gaining clarity in terms of what you want to do first before you go and start talking to people and having those conversations. Sit down with yourself, do some self-reflection. In fact, Luki has, posted a video not too long ago on how do you discover your purpose. Sure. I really like that video. And in there, there's a bunch of different exercises you can do to figure out, what is your purpose on a broader scheme. But then within that, what roles, what industries, what companies would be best for you, right? And then, of course, your values, what's most important to you in terms of, what matters most, right? So look at that as well. I would say also have some mentors outside of the formal education space. So for me, it was my older brother. For you, it could be your parents or an older sibling or an uncle or an aunt, right? So pick 1 or 2 people who have, again, been through that journey, possibly, similar to yours, who you can look up to for guidance and support. And then the last thing I would say is, this whole journey of career can be very intimidating. So surround yourself with people who can be your cheerleaders, right? People who believe in yourself, people who believe in your worth. So you always have those positive people around you, especially during times when you feel dejected or there are rejections coming through or you feel very lost and confused. These people can make a big difference.
Sounds good. A lot of great words of wisdom there. Starting from the last one, like surrounding yourself with cheerleaders. I equate that to like that you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So similar vein, if you're with more positive people, those that'll encourage you, then chances are you'll do better. There are people who are like more pessimistic or realist or whatever, but oftentimes that might not help you as much as someone who's more positive and optimistic, right? Mentors outside the education system, I think that's super important. And it doesn't have to be a relative. I mean, it could be older brothers, aunts, uncles, and stuff like that. That seems to be closest, but it could be just someone that I don't know, your coach for pickup basketball or someone, or someone that
it could be a friend as well.
Exactly. So it could be someone where you aspire to be, and with things like LinkedIn, you could reach out and connect with them, right? It is possible. Now that they could say no, but why not give it a shot? And then really taking the time to start early and understanding what you want, getting clarity, your values, all these different exercises, whether it's before grade 12 or in first, second, third year university, that sort of stuff. Don't wait until you're just at the cusp of graduation, have to make these big decisions. because a lot of it is the exploration, right? So there's some of you out there who are listening that know exactly what you want. That's probably much easier for you to do. But for those of you who are still figuring it out and need to explore, well, start earlier and then constantly revisit some of those assumptions that you have, because what you thought when you were in first year in grade 9 might be totally different than what you experienced a little bit later. So I think a lot of that is great words of wisdom. So if you can share a little bit about what you'll be up to in the next little while, any sort of future aspirations, and then if folks want to reach out to you, where can they connect with you?
Absolutely, Luki. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, for your for your time today, as well as for interviewing me today. In terms of my future aspirations, for now, my mind is just focused on the little baby. So it's personal aspirations, I guess, taking priority over professional aspirations. So yeah, just spending as much time with him, taking care of him, being supportive, because my wife has a pretty hectic schedule herself, and it's just the two of us at home with him. So balancing that. In terms from a professional perspective, yes, I want to go back and continue with Deloitte Canada and see, where have they reached from when I left them, to see, what kind of projects are going on, because it was quite interesting, the work we were doing. In addition to Deloitte, I also want to, continue doing my coaching. I find a lot of fulfillment, especially in the coaching, coaching people who are underprivileged, coaching people who have gone through tough times, and really then seeing them transform, seeing them succeed gives me a lot of joy. So that's something I don't want to give up. Possibility to scale that, to scale that coaching, I don't know. It's hard to say, with two girls and the little one at home. Sometimes, you have aspirations, but then, life happens. My wife, Xian, who is also a mutual connection, she's an entrepreneur, and she does a lot of coaching herself, executive coaching. So we've been in talks as well for the two of us possibly to combine our offerings and do something on a bigger scale. So that's a possibility as well. So many things up in the air right now, but hopefully the next few months I'll have more clarity.
Sounds good. And if folks want to reach out, though, LinkedIn is probably the best place for them.
Yeah, so I don't use much of the other social media platforms. So I'm definitely not on TikTok, not on Instagram, not on X or Facebook. So yes, LinkedIn would be the go-to place. And I accept most of the connection requests I get, unless if you have like one connection or if you don't have a picture, then I might be a little suspicious. But otherwise, feel free to reach out. Send me a note as well, saying, where you saw me or heard me, and I would be more than happy to accept and connect with you.
Sounds good. So thank you so much, Yauhan, for sharing your journey. The stuff I wish I knew earlier. Again, lots of words of wisdom, and probably more future podcasts that we could do a deep dive. And thanks so much for taking the time, and hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
I would love that, Luki. Thank you again. Thanks for your time as well, and thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.